Okay. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. This is part 2, but it's been a couple of weeks since we gave this. So I'm going to begin reading again in verse 1 because it's such beautifully phrased. There's a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. Time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. Time to kill and a time to heal. Time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. Time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. Back in the 50s, a man by the name of Pete Seeger wrote Turn, Turn, Turn. That song still is being played. And he covers a lot of these verses I just read to you. But the whole reason of him doing that was he wanted to end the war in Vietnam. And so when it says here, a time of war, a time of peace, his whole idea behind that song was to have peace and to end the war in Vietnam. But I mean, it was a beautiful song, regardless of what his idea was about writing the song. Everything here, if he would have paid attention to it, has a beginning and an end. And God is in control of what he does. So he's placed inside every human heart a desire to know God. And we smother that desire by things that God doesn't approve of. And so it gets less and less noticeable. What profit has he that worketh and that wherein he laboreth? Now, what have we gained from our work? That's what's implied here. Is it to buy houses and cars, expensive clothes? What have we gained? Is it to find meaning? Is it so we can have money to support someone? What is the real meaning behind our labor? What profit, what gain is there in the work that we do? And so that's just something God wants us to think about. He's in control of every situation, of every life, and he wants us to evaluate what profit is there in the work that we're doing. Then he says, I've seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. Travail is heaviness, labor that has resulted in pain. It's painful labor, talking about travail. I've seen the painful labor, he said, which God has given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. In other words, the pressure that God has put upon men. He wants to see how they would respond. And many of them did not respond well. And so he talks about he's made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has set the world in their heart, so no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. Now, God placed in our heart a desire to know him. But every time we get involved in things that alienate us from God, that desire gets weaker and weaker. But when we fan that desire, God put that desire in our heart. That didn't come about by evolution, which I don't believe in. It came about by creation, that God made everything and he made man to fellowship with. And so he's made everything beautiful in his time. And he noticed that little phrase in verse 11, he set the world in their heart so that no man can find out the work that God makes from beginning to end. I don't care who you are, you can't understand all there is about God. Can understand all that God does from the beginning to the end. He is higher than our ways. He's much superior to anything that we could ever reason out in this life. And God does what he does so that you and I will turn to him, and so we will follow him. Now he says in verse 12, I know there is no good in them, and in men he's talking about, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. That's what God put us here for. He goes through every trial with us. He makes it possible for us when our heart's broke, for us to exist even when we don't feel like existing. He has done everything for a reason, that we would have a close walk with him. He set the world in our heart, that we would know one day this world's going to end. That's what we began in in the first part of this chapter. Time to be born and time to die. It talks about all these times that has a beginning and an end. And everything causes us to be accountable to God. And we know there is going to be a day of accountability. God has let us know that. He's put that inside of us. And then he goes on to say, verse 12 again, that here's the reason we ought to be able to gain from what we're working for, and that is to rejoice and to do good in this life. In other words, we've got to make a contribution for this world to be better. If no one made any contributions, this world would be a sad place to live in. But thank God for all the contributions that those that have gone before us have made. Wonderful contributions. When I was a boy, it was a real threat. If you swam in dirty water or you got around dirty water, it was a real threat to get polio. Then they came out with a polio vaccine. That was a wonderful thing. Nobody hardly ever gets polio anymore because they have the vaccine. Have a vaccine for chicken pox, for shingles even. And there's a lot of things that I think vaccinations are good for. I'm not too sure it was ever supposed to help us to not get COVID, because I know people that got all the shots and still died from COVID. So COVID was another story. I honestly think that China, this was a way to bring the world to its knees. And I believe China purposely let that virus leak out, and they let people come, and they never warned anybody about it that had the virus. And they saw how fast, that's germ warfare, how fast the world could be brought to its knees. And I don't think there was a real vaccine that prevented COVID if you were exposed to it. The best thing was to wash your hands and to keep your distance. That was the best thing you could do. My sister, who nurses warned her not to get that COVID vaccine, she never got it. But she washed her hands, kept her distance, and she never got it. But I was talking to her about it, and when she told me, explained to me how she felt about it, I said, well, that's your privilege, really. And I honor you for your privilege, but I'm going to go ahead and get it myself because I've been warned about how vulnerable I am. But it never helped. I know, and you know people too that got both vaccines and they still died of COVID. It was a terrible thing. They're still saying now that we've got an outbreak again of COVID. I don't know if that's true or not. It might just be the flu. Anything has any connection with flu or the cold, a bad cold, now it's labeled COVID. And I think COVID ran its course. I'm not saying it could start up again, but as far as I know, we're here to do one thing. That is to find the Lord, to share that knowledge with other people, and to make our corner of our world the best place we can by doing what's right. That's how we do it. He says in verse 12, I know there's no good in them, in men now, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. I think everybody that is saved ought to have that underlined because it's important. Everything we do also makes us accountable to God. He says in verse 13 also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is a gift of God to enjoy working And it's a privilege to be able to have a job that you enjoy. I've had jobs I didn't enjoy. I came out of the Air Force and jobs were hard to get. Even I went to Manpower and they didn't have any jobs except a few hard labor jobs, which I said, I'll take them. I'll take anything. They said, we got about 3 days or maybe 4 days of unloading a boxcar. And it's full from the floor to the top, full of lumber. But there'll be a truck there, and all you have to do is unload the boxcar and put it on the truck, and then somebody will drive it away. I said, all right. We started out about, I think it was about 8 o'clock in the morning. It's been years ago, so I'm not sure. I know what time it was, sometime in a hot afternoon, around probably 3:30 or 4 o'clock, that they quit, and we did that every day. And I'll tell you what, I was glad to have a job, paid good money, because nobody else wanted to do it. And I rejoiced that I was able to do the job. It was heavy because some of that lumber was banded together, and they came in bundles, but they load them in bundles and you unload them in bundles. Then a friend I knew, his dad or uncle, I guess it was, had a large farm, a potato farm. And he said, we need somebody that can pick up those potatoes. And we need somebody tall like you when you gather the baskets, because we got 5 or 6 people gathering these potatoes, putting them in a basket, but they're not tall enough to reach up and put them in that big truck. But you can do it. I said, yeah, I can do it. Man, you do that all day long. I'm telling you, when you got home at night, I didn't even want anything to eat. I was so tired. All I wanted to do is go to bed, take me a shower and go to bed. I've had a couple of jobs where it was hard work, but I enjoyed it because I had a job and I had money that I could contribute to the household. He says, I know that whatever God does, I know that whatsoever God doeth is how he says it, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it, and God doeth it, that men should fear before him. Now, God does things so there's lasting effects. He sends earthquakes. Only God knows when he sends an earthquake how many of those people are going to survive. I'm talking about a bad earthquake that has hit parts of this world where thousands of people have been killed, thousands maimed. And God does it so men will turn to him. Why does God send it to certain parts of the world and not to others? Only he knows. The floods that the last couple of years have been horrendous. Lots of lives lost. If those girls had not reached the age of accountability, they'll go automatically to heaven. If they know they have sinned, then they're accountable. But I know there was a lot of them that was underage that was killed. I don't know now. I've forgotten. Was it 100 of them that was killed in that flood there in Texas? There was a lot of them. I'm not sure what the final count was, but they found one girl. I think it was 3 days after it was over in a washed up wood pile, and she was moaning and groaning, which is the only way they knew she was alive. They found another one up in a tree that about 3 days after the water had receded, and they were able to get her. But many of those were just lost. In the Philippines, every time there's a bad hurricane, a bad typhoon, there's a lot of houses that are destroyed, and a lot of people are just simply washed out to sea. They don't have strong houses to begin with, and when a typhoon hits them, or a hurricane, some of them's hurricanes, some of them's typhoons. I don't know what the difference is, but whenever they hit, they have water and wind, and that does a lot of devastation and it kills a lot of people. The Philippines has a tendency to overload vehicles and they overload boats. And a lot of times these boats are overloaded and they go out to sea and they begin to topple or they begin to sink. And a lot of people are drowned because they simply put too many people on them. And a little 4-person Jeep I've seen 8 and 10 people ride in those things. And they really stick out, hold on to the sides, hold on to the person next to them, and they ride somewhere overloaded. Now, if they hit somebody, it's usually pretty devastating because they don't have any protection on those Jeeps. And I used to have my kids, we sent them to a Christian school, and he used to have a motorcycle guy. He has a sidecar and a motorcycle on the sidecar. And 2 of the kids would ride there. So the first day I took them there, I told the guy, I want to see how you drive, and I want you to show me the way you're going. I want you to go the way that has the least amount of traffic, because traffic is a real problem in most cities. I mean, it's heavy, really heavy. And so I told him, I said, there's a back way we can go. We went the back way, and wouldn't you know it, a stinking goat ran right out in front of us. Right as we got there, the motorcycle and the goat hit. And I was tall enough that when it turned on its side, I was able to put the weight of that motorcycle, a lot of it on my hips and shoulder, and I stood up so that my kids never hit the ground. Now, they never did hit the ground, and the guy that was there scared him to death. And he really was scared. I said, didn't you see that goat? No, I didn't see it. I saw no goat. Well, you saw it now because it's laying right there. But anyhow, those situations that you got into that you thank God that you're able to get out of. And I witnessed a guy, I think, if I remember right, he made a profession of faith. I told him, I said, you could have got killed. You could have had my children killed. I could have been killed. But I said, God protected. Yeah, God protected us. Yes, he did. And he's able to do that. Without the fear of God, a lot of things in life is perverted and taken advantage of, and God's not seen. He said in verse 16, moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. So he said the places where God's presence, God's justness should have been administered, it was not. The government, he said, was abusive. The government took advantage. I saw this, a people oppressed them. That means they were cruelly taken advantage of. They were oppressed, and they had nowhere to come. He said there was no comforter when that happened. So when they were oppressed, he noticed that people could not turn to God because they didn't know how to find God, and they were so beat down because of the oppression and the injustice that they just simply went around in sorrow. But everything we do ought to make us think about God. The places of righteousness, the places of worship, they did nothing to correct the abuses of the government. They didn't even talk about them. The unjust judges, the hypocritical religious disorders, all revealed that there was somebody that was taking advantage of other people. A day of judgment will end all that. He said, I saw under the sun, the place of judgment. That's usually government, place, people in authority. Wickedness was there. And a place of righteousness, that's the churches. Iniquity was there. And so he's saying, the church was not exempt from this wickedness that I saw. It was not exempt from the injustice. I think what he's alluding to is the churches never spoke out about the injustices that was taking place all around them. I know for a fact that some preachers won't preach on sin. There's one guy was questioned why he never preached on sin, and he said that wasn't his calling. He was to be I think he said he was to be a comforter. He was not to preach on sin. That wasn't his calling. We've got a big church down there somewhere in the South. And they said, well, we noticed you never talk about judgment. No, that's not my calling either. And a reporter was questioning him about that. The Bible says God's preachers ought to address the corruption that's in government when it's there. We ought to talk out against the transgenderism homosexuality is shown from the Bible. Very wrong. You don't hear much talked about it. Now, I don't dwell on it, but Romans 1:26 tells us that God will give homosexuals up to do that which is against nature. And God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are unseemly, which are not natural. So God gives them up. And that's all I'm going to say about it. He does it because they don't want to retain God in their knowledge. They want to worship and serve the creature more than the creator. Then God just gives them up. There's nothing you can do when God gives somebody up. I was reading this letter that I get from BIMI. They got several missionaries all over the world. And I know of Rick Martin, who's in the Philippines. He's in an island called Iloilo. And I know about what he's done on an island. He's won a lot of that island. You go on an island. And I started church on an island because a lady that had some money said she would pay for the cost for us to start a church on the island because she had relatives over there and they had lived there and they would never come to the mainland. It was about 4 hours, if I remember right, from where we were. We had to take a boat to get there. But we started church after 1 week, and then we would have a preacher come around regularly and preach in that church that was started. Well, this fella, his name was Samson Clorion. Clorion, Clorion, Clorion. At 5 years of age, he got the measles and lost his sight. As a teenager, he tried to fill his days by being popular and running with teenagers, but all they wanted to do was smoke and drink. And after a while of that, he looked at himself one day when he was alone and he said, "A blind drunkard looks foolish, and I'm going to give it up. It's not giving me any satisfaction." So how would he fill his days? He only had a radio that he began to listen to. One of the graduate students from Iloilo Bible College began to preach the gospel on a radio station, and this blind man, Samson, listened to it intently and got saved. After he got saved, he wondered, how can I serve the Lord and how can I worship the Lord? I'm blind. He would go across the rice paddies, feel his way along, many times slip and fall down because he couldn't see. And eventually, a preacher came in that village and he started a church that was close to his home. And he showed him how he had a cow, he owned a cow, how he could ride that cow to church. So that's what he did. He began to ride that cow to church. Then he wanted to do more than that. So he began to try to memorize where people lived, and then he would go visit them. Sometimes he would fall down, but he would still get up and go after them. After a while, he felt God wanted him to start a church. So he started a church on his own. And many, many people came because of his sincerity. He said, "I now know why the Lord saved me." And he knew why God had taken his sight, because he didn't turn to God before that. Of course, he was young. He was only 5, and then got the measles and lost his sight. But you can do anything you want to do. Here was a man, had a good excuse for not going to church, but he never used that excuse. He even slipped and fell his way and stumbled his way to church. Our work that we do should always include God's work. Always should point people to God for it to succeed. Now, God has allowed us to struggle with the seasons we live through so that we long for eternity with Him. Every year now that I get older, I get a little bit more anxious for heaven. And I guess that's how it is with everybody as you get older. But he found out that in this place of injustice, that the church was not exempt from sin or injustices. And he noticed that sinners do whatever they desire to do. And if they wanted to use an excuse to not serve God, they would find an excuse not to serve God. The sinners who God allows to escape judgment are those who realize that without God's Holy Spirit, they live like animals. And he talks about that. He talks about, he says, verse 19, for that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beast. Even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. They have all one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. All go into one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goes downward to the earth? So the spirit of a beast goes back to the dust and the earth. Spirit of man either goes to his eternal reward in heaven, or it goes down to eternal separation from God. But he says, without the Holy Spirit of God, verse 21, we're no different than animals. Who knows the spirit of man that goes upward, and the spirit of the beast that goes downward? Only God does. Wherefore I perceive there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? We don't know what's going to come after us. We don't know who's going to take our place, and we don't know exactly all that we do is going to succeed. Only God knows that. But without God's Holy Spirit, we don't live the kind of life that's pleasing to the Lord. So Solomon's frustrated again by the fact there's nothing better in this life than to look forward to spending time with God, or to go down like a beast and live a life apart from God like an animal. He says there's no satisfaction in doing that, though. Now, in this 3rd chapter, he has dealt with everything that the natural man looks forward to having in this life to enjoy. He talks about pleasure. He had sought out every kind of pleasure, and it didn't satisfy. He even went after acquisitions of lands and houses and farms. That didn't satisfy him. He sought silver and gold. That didn't satisfy him. He sought wine, women, and song. He had 1,000 of them. That didn't satisfy him. Matter of fact, his wives turned his heart to their gods and away from God. And I think God allows him to write from that standpoint, because he got away from God for a while, but God brought him back. He ended up coming back to God. But when ungodly leaders oppress those that are under them, it's not an easy time. We saw that happen in the Philippines. And I said to people, we need to pray for the president of the Philippines, because he has enough money that he could actually lift the burden of some of these people who have nothing to look forward to but starvation and ample amounts of rice to keep them alive. We had several people send to my house and say, can you help us? We're hungry, have kids, we don't have a job, and we need something. I said, go get a 50-pound bag of rice. I'll give you the money. When that runs out, come and see me. I'll help you again. 50-pound bag of rice back then cost about $10. And with them, that was of their money. 10 times 10 would be 100 pesos. And 100 pesos was beyond what they could afford. But God bless us when we do that. And I always felt good about doing it. And I thought, oftentimes, what if it was reversed? Their situation that they're in, third world country, many of them have no job. Many of them live from day to day with just a little handful of rice. Wouldn't we like it if somebody would help us, if they had the ability to help us? I'm sure we would. And I'm sure that other people, if they had the ability to help, they would. I've seen little children begging on the streets, runny nosed, dirty, hungry. And I'd go over to them and I would say, are you hungry? They'd shake their head and they'd look around, because they're put out there to beg and the money that they get is taken from them. I said, don't worry, I'm going to buy you something to eat, and nobody's going to get mad at you. If they get mad, they're going to have to get mad at me. I'm buying you something to eat. Go over and tell them what you want to eat. And I told the vendor, when they told them, they looked around to see if anybody had any money to pay. I said, I'm paying for them, so give them what they want. And then somebody would come out of hiding. Usually it was an uncle, some relative. Hey, what are you kids doing? I said, hey, let them alone. They're hungry. I told them they could get whatever. I'm buying it. And I don't want you to give them any repercussions, or I don't want you to take out anger on them because I told them to do it. Oh, no, sir. No, sir. Good. You're buying them something to eat. I said, yeah, you could, but you won't, because you would rather have liquor or something that you spend your money on. And it's not right. You're not right with God. You should get right with God. Then you would want to have these kids to have a meal. And you wouldn't be giving them threatening looks like you are. And I said, I'm going to stay here until they finish eating whatever they want to eat, and then they can eat as much as they want to eat. And the kids, man, they were smiling. They were happy. But they probably got in trouble later, but at least they got a meal that day anyhow. I've had people sit down with me in a restaurant when I and my family were eating a meal. And they would say on occasion, it didn't happen all the time, but it happened occasionally, they would say, we're hungry. Would you buy us a meal? I said, if you sit down and order what we're going to have, you can have it. I'll pay for it. And the waitress would come over to send them away because they don't like beggars. And they would send them away. I said, no. I told them, sit down. I said, whatever he wants, if it's what our kids and myself is ordering, he can have it. Have as much as he wants. Just send me the bill. Okay, sir. And so I felt good whenever I was able to do that. Again, if the table was reversed, I would want somebody, if I was hungry, to buy me a meal. I've even done it here in America. When I was working for CBTS, I would see these guys begging. They said they're hungry and whatever you can give me, I would appreciate it. And I'm out of work and I'm hungry. And so a couple of times I went over and I said, are you hungry? Yes, I am. I said, let's go in here and we're going to have a bowl of soup and a sandwich and I'll pay for it. Okay. And so I would buy them something to eat, give them a tract, witness to them. And I said, I know you could just get me off your back by making a profession of faith, but I don't want you to do that. I want you to think about this. God's good. He gave you a meal from somebody that knows him, loves him. I said, and I want you to think about this. I want you to read this tract before you go to bed at night. I want you to read that tract 2 or 3 times. And it always had a plan of salvation in it where they knew they were a sinner and that God could save them of their sin. Now, will I see the result of that? Whether I do or not. I did something that I felt good about doing. He says in this next chapter, and we're going to get into that next time. So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, all the injustices, all the cruel oppressions. And behold, the tears of such as were oppressed. There are many in this world that's oppressed by hunger today. They really are. We've got a lot of third world countries. Philippines has really jumped ahead in their economy 10 times better than it was when we were there. We went back and we were impressed how much it had grown and how much the economy had improved. But there's a lot of places still in the Philippines where people go hungry at night and they don't have enough to eat. There's a lot of people in Russia, I found out, that do not have enough food to eat. I don't know how they make it. They don't have the availability of food that we have. I saw that with my own eyes. And I see how that people try to hoard, and you go there and you take stuff to get by. My wife had us take snacks and things, and I don't remember all we took, tuna, I think, peanut butter, things like that, because you couldn't just buy everything on the open market. And where we went, a lot of times there were no restaurants. And so we wouldn't get anything to eat sometimes until we got back to the motel where we had this stuff, because we never carried it with us, hardly ever. But we had things back there we could eat. And it's amazing to me how little of food they had and how little of variety of food they had. If you went to a restaurant, of course, you had to take an interpreter because they don't speak English, most of the places there. And then we would ask an interpreter, what is for dinner or what is for supper? What do they have on the menu? They'd have one item. They wouldn't have 2 or 3, one item. That's true. They'd say, well, we got pork chops. Well, that wasn't my favorite thing back then. Now, I like them a lot now, but I didn't like them too much then. And I said, that's all? What else they have? Pork chops. That's it. Go to another restaurant. What's on the menu? Borscht. What else? That's it. Borscht. That's a cabbage soup. You got that or nothing. And some places, honestly, we went to, they didn't have any food. They say, no food, we got vodka. Well, we don't drink vodka. We don't care about vodka. It's amazing to me you can afford vodka, but you don't have no food. No wonder you're going bankrupt. And that's true, what I'm telling you. But anyway, our time's up. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, as we study this book of Ecclesiastes, here's a man that had everything. And he didn't find happiness in everything. He had everything that this human heart could desire, and yet it brought him no happiness until he found his place with you. And even when he had everything, he said it still did not satisfy. And I pray that those that are listening that have never been saved, if they've never turned to you, I pray they would bow their heads and ask you for forgiveness. You made a promise that whosoever would call upon the name of the Lord would be saved. So I pray, Lord, that if anyone's listening, they've never been saved, they would trust you as their Savior. Thank you for each one that came tonight. I pray each one would go away to their home, blessed and encouraged in the things of God. And God's people said, all right, we're going to read a prayer list, and then we're going to